The preseason is over, which means teams have less than 2 weeks left before the regular season kicks off. The Seahawks bring a brand new vibe into 2024 as they battle in one of the toughest divisions in the NFL. Joining us to break down the entire NFC West is senior writer for The Athletic and beat reporter for the Rams, Jourdan Rodrigue. Let's light him up.
I'm Jacson Bevins, and this is Cigar Thoughts.
Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jacson Bevins, and along with my insipid producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts podcast. Mike, how we doing?
We're doing well, man. We're ready for football to almost officially be here. I mean, there's been some preseason. There have been some games. Players have suited up and took the field, but we're almost to real football, and the rosters finally reflect that.
Oh my gosh, man. It's crazy. Today, we are recording on Tuesday, August 27th. Some of you will be listening to this the following day or the days after, but we are in the immediate aftermath of the cuts, and nothing overwhelmingly surprising. You know, the thing that I always root for in the preseason, even with major coaching changes, is no news. I don't want to hear about anything happening as far as injuries go, and Seattle came so close to getting through the preseason without a major injury. Of course, we saw Uchenna Nwosu get hurt in the final preseason game on a very questionable chop block. But the fact that when cuts were announced, he was not put on IR, that's a big thing, because the window given to an MCL sprain, which is what he suffered, is 2 to 6 weeks. And if it was closer to 6 weeks and you're trying to figure out who you're keeping on the roster, it's easy to IR a guy and keep an extra player. The fact that they didn't tells me they're probably feeling that it's closer to the 2-week timetable for Nwosu, which is huge for this team,
especially in the wake of the Darrell Taylor trade. And then they ended up turning around and pivoting to a different edge rusher, Travis Gibson, who they brought in, who was pretty successful a couple years back for the Bears. So, I mean, rotational piece. We'll see if he sticks. But, yeah, good news on the Nwosu front. Yeah, interesting how thin they went at running back and linebacker, especially after another trade for Michael Barrett. And I will say, after they waive him, you better be counting your fucking lucky stars, dog. You better be. I know. You better be feeling. You better
believe me. I know.
I know. You prayed. You prayed to your overlord or practiced some sort of dark voodoo to make that happen. But a Mike B on that team.
I know.
Listen, your ego couldn't have taken that one.
It has been a huge battle between Team Mike and Team Jacson on this roster. And the one olive branch connecting the two warring factions was Mike Jacson, who the Seahawks traded for Mike Barrett from the Titans.
They chose. Schneider chose. He chose his side. But
he did.
Maybe not.
And
but maybe not.
My fellow Mike McDonald said, no, sir. They cut Michael Barrett.
Which is kind of wild.
It is actually wild, because it's not like they traded for him 3 weeks ago and they're like, yeah, this guy doesn't have it. They traded for him like a few days ago. Like they didn't even really get a chance to see this guy in action. And you mentioned how thin they are at running back. They're only carrying 4 off-ball linebackers. Man, that is very, very different from the Pete Carroll era. And our friend Davis Sue was quick to point out when the cuts came out that another, telltale sign that this is a different era. They kept 26 trench dudes. You only get to keep 53, and basically half of them are on the line of scrimmage between 11 offensive linemen, 11 defensive linemen / edge outside linebacker, and then 4 tight ends. This is a team that is dedicated to trying to win in the trenches, which is a welcome reprieve from the Seahawks of the last 5 years.
Well, you know, Jacson, at this show, you and I have always prioritized heft and gumption on the line of scrimmage. So, you know, we think that running the ball is sexy, and God damn it, the Seahawks are going to try to do just that.
They are, man. You and I were a big fan of the haunches. And the Seahawks, they've been lighting the pants for the last few years. That ain't the case this year. We'll see if it works out. And look, I cannot wait to talk to Jourdan about this division where the Seahawks fit into it. But first, I do want to remind everyone listening that Cigar Thoughts is proud to be sponsored by Seattle Cigar Concierge and Glenfiddich Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, two companies whose products I enjoy on a regular basis. Those of you who've been with us all summer already know this, but for those of you who are joining or rejoining us as we get closer to the season, we have teamed back up with Seattle Cigar Concierge for an exciting second release of the Cigar Thoughts cigars. That's right. It's the Cigar Thoughts Red Zone series. I'm smoking one right now. It combines a robust taste profile with a smooth Connecticut wrapper and will be available to purchase using the link on the show page for the same discounted price of $149 for a bundle of 10 stogies that you're used to with the Cigar Thoughts Originals. If you like the darker cigars, get the originals. If you like the lighter cigars, which is where I'm trending currently, get these Red Zones. And my goal with these releases is to provide an avenue to high-end cigars without the high-end cost. This partnership provides exactly that. I mean, the feedback on these stogies has been excellent so far, and we would love yours as well. They also make a great gift, so get some for yourself or for someone else by following the link at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Look, Mike and I love doing this show, and we carve out a significant amount of our personal time to make it happen. So there are two ways that y'all listening and watching can help support it so that we can keep the episodes coming. One is by purchasing the cigars, which again, come at an astonishing price for the quality. The other is by subscribing to our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts, where you can watch full episodes as well as the funny and insightful clips that Mike puts together. Give a thumbs up to the stuff you like and let us know what you think in the comments. And of course, you can listen to us everywhere you get your podcasts. Now, Mike, you know how excited I am to have today's guest on. She is not only one of the best beat reporters in the entire business, but she is deeply connected and respected across the entire league. She primarily covers the Rams for The Athletic, and she's here to help us dive into what should be an extremely competitive NFC West. She is Jourdan Rodrigue. Jourdan, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me. Today is August 27th. I see what you're smoking. You might need to roll me something a little stronger based on the day that I just had.
Hey, we got that on deck too. You just let me know.
I'll be right there. Just give me a minute.
Yeah. This is about to become a very blunt podcast. But it has. I mean, this has been a crazy day for you. You know, I mean, it's cuts day, and I think as fans, it's something where we see these cuts come across our Twitter feeds. Maybe we don't even, and most of them are names that a lot of folks don't recognize or don't feel connected to. But for you, this has got to be one of the more intense days, certainly of the offseason.
Yeah, Ernest Jones. They traded Ernest Jones, team captain, started for them for almost all of the 3 years that he's been with the Rams so far. Third round draft pick. Les Snead's favorite draft pick of that draft class. Wore the green dot. Learned from Bobby Wagner, who I know Seahawks fans have a very, very warm spot in their hearts for. Yeah, this one was... I would say it was surprising in the initial when I heard and then subsequently reported that they were shopping him around / taking calls on him. They had alerted him that they were open to the potential of the possibility of trading him. So it moved very, very quickly after that. The idea was they wanted to get this done quickly. He wasn't at practice on Monday, and obviously today, August 27th, was when that trade kind of went through. But I think that on the outside, fans have such a soft spot for Ernest Jones because of such an emotional leader that he has been at that Mike spot, and he helped the team win a Super Bowl. And then minus Aaron Donald, Aaron sort of verbally passed the reins to Ernest in terms of taking over that leadership on the defensive side. Now, I think once you start to pick and extrapolate a little bit more, you're less surprised, which I'm sure we'll dig into. But yeah, between that and Sean McVay announcing that Kyron Williams is returning punts for them, it's been a day, guys.
Unreal. Yeah, it actually has been kind of a chaotic week or 2 weeks for the Rams, and we are going to go team by team through this division. And I definitely want to touch on some of that chaos when we do get to that team. But, circling back to Cuts Day, just as an event, how stressful is it for players and front offices to have to make these choices? Because they're telling 37 different individuals, it's not going to be you right now.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I've watched it for years and years. And some of the really hard things, I think about them every year because I think it really helps to keep a perspective of this is real life. These aren't just transactions on a ticker. These are people with family, their families are affected. And, I'll never forget, and I won't share his name, but I'll never forget, walking into Publix the day before cuts. And, this is back in Charlotte when I covered the Panthers. And one of the depth safeties who was trying to make the roster, he had rushed to get dual labrum surgery, and his wife had just had a baby, and he was wheeling around a little cart in the grocery store asking, the assistant to help with getting stuff off the high shelves because his wife was at home taking care of their child, and he was trying to get groceries. And it just was so, the next day was cuts. And it's it's heart-wrenching to imagine the lives that are overturned. And it's also a brutal reality of it. Every NFL roster every year, there are really only 3 to 6 spots actually available on that 53-man, if that. And you're basically, if you're one of those depth guys, you're fighting for a practice squad spot. You're fighting for some stability. And I think, it's obviously important to remember that. And from the front office perspective as well, it's important for them to remember that. So they're not just churning through some of these cuts in a very mechanized way. And you do hear that sometimes front offices do get like that.
Yeah, it's so easy to forget the human element. One of the coolest things that's happened from Cigar Thoughts is just the ability to meet and get to know some players and people who are connected with these teams. And I remember way back, the Seahawks drafted a 5th round safety named Mark Legree, and he and I became friends. And remember, he didn't make the team. And he was on the Appalachian State team that beat Michigan and, led the country in interceptions. This was a dude, right? And he didn't make the team. And then he went back to North Carolina, and he chatted with him. He's like, I can't get a job because I have to be able to answer the phone and hop on a plane to a workout. He did that for 3 or 4 years, bounced around some practice squads, made a couple active rosters, but he's just he's hardly making any money, but he can't go home and live his life because he's a phone call away from being on the next flight out of town. And it's tough, for the guys who make it. It's kind of like being a PGA golfer. If you're one of those top 80-ish guys that you're getting paid every week and you got the sponsorships, what an amazing life. But everyone else is just fighting on that knife's edge for a livelihood and chasing their dreams. And yeah, it's got to be real tough. And then for you to just keep track of all of it, right? That's a lot you got to put out there.
Yeah. And then, perspective too. It's I cover a game, and I'm lucky to meet, like you said, really great people through the course of covering a game. For me, it is so important to not just do the rote sort of, okay, file that transaction, file. It's really important for me to really sit with cuts all, every year when it happens, and really, remember the perspective of, you're cranking right now. You're churning out, your editors are asking you to do a million different, all that stuff. But this is someone's life. And so, I'm never generally far from that perspective of all I got to do is write about it. God willing, I'm not cut, right? Right. I need wood to knock on here behind me here. But God will, but it's this is a reality every single year for people. It's a circled date on the calendar. It's that march toward hope/dread and the blend of that. And so I do think that for me, it's a busy day. I joke about, Rams have a normal day challenge, right? But this is real life for a lot of people. And so it's always, for me, important to keep that perspective.
Yeah. Well, and it's not like this is the final day. A lot of these guys are going to come back on practice squads. A lot of these guys are going to get picked up by other teams and put on active rosters, have chances to continue chasing their dreams. But we are now seeing the vast majority of these rosters set. We have a clearer idea of who these teams are heading into the season. And I do want to focus on this division, not only because it's the one that the teams you and I cover are in, but because I do think that it's one of the most competitive and one of the toughest divisions in the NFL. It's been that way for a long time. This year portends to be the same. And, I had a really cool opportunity to go on Mina Kimes' show.
I loved that episode, by the way. It was so good. I was like panicking today. I was like, oh my God, they already crushed this so good. Like what do I possibly have to add? Like I was so entertained listening to that. It was fantastic. I texted, like I think I messaged you afterward, like, or some, I tweeted or something. I was like, it just was excellent. So you should be very proud of that. I mean, you're a pro, so no surprise, but like, that was so cool. And it was like, oh, the gang got together, like I remember following along from afar, all the little circles of different teams and all that. So I just thought that was so rad. So anyway, not to cut you off, but I thought that was so rad.
That's extremely kind of you to say. You got me blushing on my own show now. But the reason that I bring it up is for those of you who are watching or listening and may have caught that show, we are going to cover some of that same ground. But I'm really, really excited to do that with you, Jourdan, because you are so close to it. And I think just for the sake of simplicity, we'll just go alphabetically. I want to start with the Arizona Cardinals. To me, this is a team that was the punchline of a lot of jokes last year, and then through 9 games they looked every part of that at 1-8. But they were a feisty 1-8, and then they got Kyler back. And with Kyler Murray, they went from being a bottom 5 offense to being a top 10 offense. They won 4 of their final 8 games, and the games they lost, most of them, they pushed their opponent to the very edge, including the Seahawks. So this is a team with a lot of positive momentum. They didn't have a whole lot of playmakers last year. They added a huge one in the draft this year. It's just starting top line, looking down at this team. What are your impressions of the Cardinals going into the 2024 season?
Yeah, last season they were such a Jekyll and Hyde team, right? Not only were they Jekyll and Hyde through the first part of the year versus the second part of the year, and I would call the offense was like totally juxtaposed to the defense, but you could see that they were trying things even on defense when they could not stop. It was like the Mississippi River running through a paper towel. Like it just was not, they could not stop anything. Even when that was happening, you could still see that this was really a year where you almost, and you heard whispers of this too, where Jonathan Gannon and Nick Rallis, their defensive coordinator, they put their heads together and looked at their roster and were really blunt about it. They're like, all right, look, Kyler is hurt the first part of this year. So we know what we are not going to be on offense without him. And we also know how much work we have to do personnel-wise to building back up this defensive roster, overhauling some of it, and then installing a new scheme. And I always call it like, how when teams try to onboard, and we've seen it actually this year in a couple of ways, they try to onboard the rookie quarterback while developing the veteran a little bit more to try to get the veteran maybe a contract down the road. But they're also giving the rookie quarterback a cushion. They're taking the pressure off of him a little bit. And they're letting him go out and try stuff and make mistakes and do things. I feel like that was the Cardinals' ethos on defense. They made a lot of mistakes, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But you could really see that they were going out and doing things. One thing that really caught my ear, the stats aside, the stats are dismal. Like, I'm not trying to sugarcoat this here. But the stats aside, one thing that really caught my ear, when Matthew Stafford here in LA talks about defenses and what he sees from defenses, I listen to every word and even every pause, because that guy has seen a lot of ball and he had never really seen what the Cardinals were trying to do in terms of some of their disguises. And not a lot of it made a ton of sense at times because they were just trying stuff. And that was part of what tripped him up, is it was clear they were trying to disguise different things. They were trying to move players in different positions. And so I do think that figuring out what they couldn't do was a big part of what that Cardinals defense was actually attempting to achieve, which sounds crazy because this is the NFL, right? Every year you got to try to win. But I think they just were realistic with themselves. I think that's like a bit of ego death, frankly, in realizing kind of more so what you're not going to be that year and going out and testing new ideas and new concepts. And then on the offensive side, just taking a big picture lens, like this was the nice part of things, right? All throughout the course of the year, the second half of the year, the first you saw really, again, you saw what they were not without Kyler Murray. And then you saw so much possibility and so much potential and a lot of really interesting things that I think are hitting the league right in the moment it needs to be met in terms of some of the heavier personnel usage that they're going to be using, and the way that Kyler can throw the ball, the way that Kyler can move, but also the way that Drew Petzing can get this run game going and really punish people with it and play keep away. And so I have to think that a lot of the Cardinals philosophy and strategy this year is going to be exactly that. Load up on their personnel, split Marvin Harrison Jr. out wide and just get him the ball whenever you can and have Kyler extend those pass plays to where he's wide open downfield before the DBs even know what happened and load up and play keep away from teams so that you're not as worried about your defense. You still are giving your defense a little bit of a breath, a little bit of a time to grow up a little bit more. That's really what I truly think the Cardinals strategy is going to be this year.
Yeah, and I think that it's easy to forget who Jonathan Gannon is, right? Like this is someone that yeah, I can't remember who it was. It might have been the Ringer Fantasy guys, but someone said that he was and now I'm spacing on the name. Who was the eldest Roy brother in succession?
Oh, Kendall Roy.
Kendall Roy. And I was like, oh my
so
God.
Good.
That's so perfect.
That's really good.
And it's kind of this, similar, Dan Campbell when he first came in and had his first press conference, everyone was like, okay, who's this guy? He's kind of a cartoon character. But Jonathan Gannon, we've seen what he can be when he has talent. He was the defensive coordinator for the Eagles team that were a play away from winning the Super Bowl. And they were, for most of that season, very dominant on defense. And to your point, it is really cool that they did, understand like, hey, we're probably not going to win playoff games this year. Let's figure some things out. And, there's going to come a time. They had 6 of the first 90 picks in this draft. They're going to be loaded up with a lot of draft capital next year as well. As they start to bring in, they've got a great cap situation. As they bring in talent, this defense could get better quickly. Now, losing BJ Ojulari to the ACL before the season, that's such a killer. I mean, he's one of like 2 good defensive players they have. So that's going to set some things back. But this is a feisty team, and a full season of Kyler Murray with what we think will be a true number 1 receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't expect them to be an easy out this year.
Yeah, they're going to be scrappy. And I think when I think about Jonathan Gannon, other than the soundbite that I just imitated of when he was talking about explosive passing plays. It was so good. I also think about that time he was cursing from his Range Rover stuck in Philly traffic going into the stadium, talking mad smack right before they were going to go try to put a hurt on somebody. Like that's also the Jonathan Gannon that I remember when I think about like the scrappiness element. And I think that again, the way that Drew Petzing, by the way, is my sleeper OC of the year candidate because I do think that he's super, super talented. And I know you guys are talking about him because I listen, but I listened to you and Mina and it was great. But I really think that this guy has some not tricks, but some really, really solid scheme and some really solid philosophy in his bag here. And you really kind of see it. They're not being very quiet or shy about who they want to be. They've literally built this roster to hit you in the mouth in the run game. And like I said, to play keep away, to protect their defense a little bit more. Because they don't have until proven otherwise, they don't have a pass rush. BJ Ojulari, that was a huge loss, like you said. Mm-hmm. They've got issues in the secondary. They've got issues everywhere. And they're going to probably have to go rely really scheme heavy on to protect some of that defense. And that also comes hand in hand with what you have to do on the offensive side. Your offense has to protect your defense. And so I do think that they're going to, especially early on, as some of those other players on the other side of the ball grow up a little bit. And Nick Rallis, like I said, figures out what he wants to do and how he wants to attack and react to teams. I do think they're, again, going to load up in 12, load up in 13, a little 21 in there, and basically say, this is who we are. You cannot defend Marvin Harrison Jr., especially when you've got a quarterback who can throw on the run and really create wider and longer space on the field with which to deploy, and a quarterback who knows where to put the ball. And then also, though, a quarterback who I don't think has ever been the type to shy away from utilizing a run game, a stable and supportive run game around him. And I think that's what they're going to do. And they've kind of just showed you who they will be on that side of the ball. I think they're going to score some points. I don't think they're going to be able to stop anything
right.
as far as what my impression is of them right now. I hope, they prove me wrong, because it's so much more fun when every team in the NFC West is truly good on both sides of the ball. And I think we're getting close to that, right?
We are.
But I think they're just, I think much like Jonathan Gannon yelling out the window of his Range Rover on the way into the state, I think that they're telling you exactly who the F they think they are this year, on offense at least.
Yeah, well, and I think it's interesting that they're big on offense. They're massive. Just in terms of size, they've got a big offensive line. They drafted a true blocking tight end to go next to Trey McBride, who's a very big, athletic receiving tight end. James Conner is a load. It's funny because this is an offense quarterback by Kyler Murray.
Do you think they're trying to just you can't see him?
Yeah, maybe. But what I like about this, you're talking about seeing 12 and 13 personnel out of this team with a big offensive line, with James Conner, with Trey Benson, who they drafted, who's a big running back that I think is going to be the future of this backfield. It's going to make it really difficult to put extra attention on Marvin Harrison Jr. split out, because there's going to be a lot of beef in the middle. And if they can take advantage of that, I think we're going to see a lot of high scoring games in Arizona this year. Yeah,
and like you said, it makes I think it just makes it more fun when you do. I mean, this using personnel like this, you can shape shift, because those, at least one of those tight ends can also catch the ball too. So you can shape shift a little bit. If you're able to load up heavy in the first place, there's no reason why you can't deload lighter. They've got Greg Dortch. Sounds like Michael Wilson's had a good camp. I actually don't worry as much. I know it's a serious situation, but I don't worry as much about them missing Zay Jones with the suspension, just because, again, I fully expect them to load up heavy and then have the ability to deload, get a little bit more flexible with some other maybe lighter personnel as teams start to defend them differently, and start to try to do whatever they can to defend who Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, is going to have an outstanding year as long as Kyler can stay healthy to get him the ball.
Totally. And just one more note on that offense. I mean, those listening who play fantasy football are aware of what Trey McBride did down the stretch. But to put that into context, when Kyler Murray came back, there wasn't a tight end with more catches or yards than Trey McBride.
Exactly.
He was Sam Laporta. He was Travis Kelce. He was Mark Andrews down the stretch. And that's going to be a real thing, especially, and this is something that has been a theme with the NFL over the last 2-3 years. I think it's going to continue to be a trend. As long as these defenses are playing these too high safety shell defenses, you're not going to get any big plays on us. Having a seam stretching tight end is such a huge weapon when it comes to disassembling that type of defense. They've got some pieces on offense, and as they start to add the pieces on defense, I believe in Jonathan Gannon as the defensive coach. This is a team that, to me, is going to be, like I said, even feistier this year. But I think going into next year, especially as the 49ers start to deal with some of their contract pinches that they're facing, as the Rams' best players are all starting to age out, I think they're going to be kind of a trendy playoff pick and going into 2025. So if you're a Cardinals fan listening to this, stay patient, because I'm pretty bullish on your future. Yeah, for the first time in a while, I think there's real hope there. I want to talk to you about your team, the team that you spend every day covering. I'm honestly very, very excited about this segment of the show.
The team that's given me these wrinkles in my forehead.
Come on. But I mean, this is a fascinating team because when you look at the Rams, I remember when we had you on last year to do this, we talked about the NFC West, and both you and I kind of wrote the Rams off because of all the turnover that they had. They were carrying like 50 rookies in training camp, and they were coming off a disastrous year, and you wrote that incredible article on Sean McVay and the existential crisis that he went through and was thinking about walking away despite being the youngest coach in the NFL. And he came back with verve and vigor and reestablished himself as one of the best coaches in the NFL. He went 10 games, a play away from winning a playoff game against a very good Lions team. But then they lose the best defensive player, certainly of the last 5 years. And depending on how you feel, Aaron Donald matches up against J.J. Watt, maybe of the last 10, 15 years. That's huge. I don't see an obvious replacement there. You look at their best players on offense, Stafford and Cooper Kupp. These are guys in their 30s. Puka Nacua comes out of nowhere. Kyron Williams comes out of nowhere to give some younger juice. But how fragile do the Rams feel to you?
It feels like this year it's going to be a weighty push, right? Like they exceeded expectations by leaps and bounds last year. And to that point, I think that Sean McVay and a lot of those really young players helped each other. And Sean will talk about this a lot, how much a lot of coaching, a lot of those young guys without any expectations, but mostly just putting pieces together day after day after day. It's a coaching cliche, but it is one for a reason. Aaron Donald told him something when he was in the throes of his sort of mental issue that he was having, and it was work works. And he kind of just would repeat that to himself over and over again, and carried that into that spring when they became, faced with the reality that they were going to try to do this rebuild. Now, about, I want to say, right before the season started, they were at joint practices with the Denver Broncos. Before that, it was dire straits. I've never seen practices like that in my entire life. They were reteaching rookies and young players and like how to do drills in the first place at the NFL level, and specifically how Sean McVay likes to run his practices. They're hyper efficient. They move very, very fast. There's a lot of stuff going on at one time. There are no breaks, and you just go. And so they had to reteach all of these things, and I'd never seen anything like that. And it looked like it was going to be just a really sketchy year. And then they went to Denver, and they had these really scrappy, like hard fought, like kind of in the dirt fight type practices without actual fighting, but they really showed up in those joint practices. And I remember a coach kind of turned to me on the sideline and was like, I think we might be okay this year. And it still took so much more than that. It took putting pieces together. It took like kind of hitting rock bottom in Green Bay halfway through the year with Matthew Stafford sitting on the bench with the hurt thumb. But they didn't kind of implode at that time, which I think that was important, because when the Rams hit rock bottom in 2022 and they imploded, Sean McVay also imploded. And this time around, it was like being in a better spot and also being, I think, more focused on what Aaron Donald had said to him. I do think it's kind of, we talk about the human element of all of this. I think it will impact those two well beyond what they understand at this moment, living in their moments of football. I think it will have a life impact eventually on both of them to have been in each other's timelines in that specific year at such a pivotal time between both of them. Aaron Donald really thinking about, is 2023 going to be my last year? Looking around, and there's nobody on that defense with him. And Sean McVay trying to understand how he can come back to coaching using words that Aaron Donald said to him as motivation. I really think that like this stuff is not an accident, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just to go from how dire things looked and like I said, I never seen anything like it. I'm an optimist. I'm a silver lining. Like, I am a happy person. I give too many compliments. I'm probably too quick to praise things that I see. And fantasy football people give me shit for this all the time. Like, I'm just too excited about everything. That's fine. But like, guys, it was bad. and so for them to exceed expectations the way that they did, well, going into this year, the expectations are there. The weight is heavy. The Matthew Stafford adjusted contract, that was him saying to them, hey, I think I've got a couple years more left in me. At least let this year reflect what I think I can be capable of. And then they can come. I fully expect them to come back and revisit the negotiating table after this season, or Matthew Stafford to explore his other options and the Rams to do that with him. It really, Cooper Kupp is 31. Rob Havenstein, their franchise right tackle, he's kind of getting to that point. I think he's 32, almost 33. Yeah. Aaron Donald is gone. They've really overhauled so much of this roster. They've got a lot of really young rookie defenders coming up on contracts at positions that they frequently invest in, including pass rush. And they're going to have to make some really hard decisions after this year. There's this feeling, not just that this year has some weight to it and the weight of that momentum that they ended last season with and expectations, but also that there is a bit of an unknown on the other side. And what's ironic is that the thing that is known is that Sean McVay is now back in it for the long haul. What is less known is where everyone else is going to be.
Right.
So this is going to be a really interesting season. I think they understand there are multiple truths. They see the value, like they see the potential of themselves and what they can accomplish despite all the injuries they're facing right now. But they also see that, this kind of has to be a year to do it, because anything less than accomplishing that could mean big questions for people who are kind of nearing that pivotal moment in their careers.
Yeah, I'm so glad you really spent some time talking about what Sean McVay went through, because it's something that I think it's, again, so easy for those of us watching the games to... It's not that we don't understand it, but it's so easy to overlook what the pressure that these guys feel is. And we don't think about the yips in coaching, right? We think about that with players, and all of a sudden you have a mental block and you can't, you're Rick Ankiel or Chuck Knobloch, all of a sudden you can't throw the ball 60 feet. It's like, that happened with Sean McVay, and it's terrifying as a fan of a team in the same division as him, is that he had that rebirth. He went from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White, except for instead of doing that at 10,000 years old or whatever, he did it at 38. Like, this guy could do this for another 30 years, and nothing's going to break him now, because he's been broken. Looking at the actual players on this team, I am a great respecter of Matthew Stafford. I think he is a Hall of Famer. I think he is one of the best quarterbacks that I've seen. I'm, as a football fan, not as a Seahawks fan, but as a football fan, I was happy to see him win a Super Bowl and kind of escape that Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers sort of tier of really, really good quarterback with a bunch of stats, but couldn't win the big one. I think he is so great. And we've seen, especially in the modern NFL now, that really great quarterbacks can play well into their 30s and stay at a high level. Cooper Kupp was kind of hot and cold off and on the field last year. He's still one of the most talented wide receivers in the NFL. Nothing about what Puka Nacua did last year feels like a fluke. I thought it was a fluke when he had 15 catches against the Seahawks in opening day and single-handedly ruined my Palm Springs trip with Mike.
Turned bleak really fast.
When they
really fast.
Kicked the Seahawks ass on opening day. But, when you have a great quarterback and a great wide receiver in the modern NFL, it can cover a multitude of sins. And now you got Kyren Williams, who's a player I loved coming out of college, and then, like everyone else, just kind of forgot about because he's a day 3 pick that got hurt and not a great track record for that. He was awesome. And the defense wasn't great, but they were good enough to kind of keep pace with the offense. But I look at the players that they added and the players that they lost. Obviously, losing Aaron Donald, there is no replacement for that. And I don't think he's the type of player you can moneyball. I don't think you can recreate Aaron Donald in the aggregate. But, I thought it was cool that they drafted teammates with Jared Verse and Braden Fisk with their first 2 picks, on that defensive line. Imagine going to a new job, the most stressful new job you can have, and hey, here's your buddy from your last job. He's there with you. That makes things easier. If you don't believe that Kyron Williams is the real deal, they brought in Blake Corum, who's kind of the coach's dream running back. And, everyone wants to find the next Puka Nacua. Well, they might have gotten him with Jordan Whittington.
This is a Spider-Man pointing
100%. I mean,
yeah.
they really looked at their strengths and said, okay, how do we duplicate that? How do we reinforce those things? And I always appreciate it when teams put more wind in their main sail. That being said, even with Aaron Donald last year, this was DVOA's 22nd ranked defense last year. Am I crazy for thinking this defense could be pretty bad in 2024?
I think if they stay healthy on the back end, so they brought in Trey White and Darius Williams. Darius Williams has missed most of training camp with the hamstring issues, only just now starting to work his way back in. Obviously, he's been with them before. He knows the language of their defense. He's a really, really effective match zone corner, which is, you're going to see a lot more of that than they did the last 2 years because they were sort of only built to stop the explosives in order to help set up their offense. That just was sort of the compromise that Raheem Morris had to make because either the offense was flailing in 2022 or B, the defense just was too young to really get a lot of scheme in there in 2023. And so Trey White has been sort of testing his rules coming back from the Achilles. Corners call it testing their rules. They figure out what their windows are, what their radiuses are, how they want to play certain routes, how they want to, even align and how they want to move, how they want to sift through traffic, flip their hips, those types of things. So he's been testing that all through training camp. He looks good. He looks like he could still take another step forward in terms of really turning the gas on. If those guys stay healthy, they added Cam Curl, which was one of my favorite things that they did. I mean, he's an outstanding player. His range is incredible. The ball skill stats are, I think, the only, and the depleted safety market, I think that's, or the deflated safety market, I think those are the only reasons why he wasn't more of a buzzed about player hitting free agency, because the range that this dude plays with is kind of incredible. I'm really excited.
Very instinctual player.
Yeah, and to be in this scheme where they really are going to do a lot and lean really heavily on their safeties, including in their sub packages. They're moving away from having corners in their sub packages, their star/nickel, their dime, and they're moving toward putting safeties in there because they have good safeties and they have a lot of them. The only thing that I still have the question about, because of health being the caveat, which is really like that for every team we're going to talk about, health being the caveat, but especially with how experienced they are in the secondary. The idea was to go out and spend money on your secondary, and then that will help your young pass rush out as you grow. You kind of saw this in 2020, minus the Aaron Donald of it all, when they were installing a new scheme. They were doing different fronts than they had done. They were playing gap and a half which they hadn't done under Wade, and they were doing a lot of new things. So they really leaned on their secondary, and they sort of went back to front until both sides sort of met. Not in the middle, because they've always struggled in the middle of the field, which we're going to talk about. But they back to front. They sort of let the coverage help dictate the front, and then once the front came up to speed with some of the pressure, the looks and the fronts that they were going to do, things sort of matched, right? That's kind of what Chris Shula, who helped identify Brandon Staley back in 2020 for Sean, is doing. And like I said, leaning heavily on those safeties.
I'm glad you mentioned Brandon Staley, Mike's favorite coach.
Oh.
Historically a big fan, yeah.
Moving right along. And so I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of scheme and a lot more aggression from the secondary, which will help out a front that is still finding its way. Now, they're too light, in my opinion, on the front. I think teams will try to run on them, and the first 3 teams out of the gate that they're going to play are definitely going to try to run on them. You've got Detroit, San Francisco, and Arizona. And like we just talked about, they're going to run the ball. And so you're thinking about they're just the minus Donald of it all looms large in the types of fear that you could maybe instill in others' hearts, the way that coordinators schemed against you. Mm-hmm. And certainly they're not trying to replace him in the aggregate. What they are trying to do is they're trying to skip a year by not having to spend a year developing chemistry between an interior rusher and an exterior rusher aligned either next to him or a couple of gaps over. That's really what they're trying to do with Braden Fisk and Jared Verse. Jared Verse, you look at him and you're like, oh yeah, that's what a first round pick looks like. Forgot what those look like over the years covering this team. Right. Lots of speed, tons of power, big voice on this team. Reminds me somewhat ironically of Jalen Ramsey, the way that he would just talk and just be in your head all the time and just like bother you. It just kind of reminds me. And they've needed sort of that edge and that personality. No pun intended, that edge. But, I actually think this defense has a chance because they improved some areas that really, really let them down in 2023. I don't think that this defense will be a lot worse statistically than what it was. And I think they're going to get better even as time passes and these young guys grow up a little. You're never going to replace the fear and the scheme that you have to impose around Aaron Donald. And, he is a huge, significant loss. The thing, though, that I think people are missing about this Rams team is like they never tried. They did not try to replace him. They, they, as we know, they had their eye on Byron Murphy in the draft and all of that. But even so, still wouldn't be replacing one for one at this time in the career arc, Aaron Donald. So they never even tried to say, okay, well, we're going to recreate his stats and his production and all of that. Instead, they're trying to do something new. They're trying to grow a front all together at the same time. It's going to look a lot different, but I don't think that it will be significantly worse. Unless teams run it at them every single play, and then I've got some concerns. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, if you're an opposing offensive coordinator, how are you attacking this defense? And I do think it's clear you need to be able to run right at them, and you need to draw those safeties closer to the line of scrimmage. I thought that one of the most underrated free agent acquisitions was Jonah Jacson, bringing him in from Detroit, who I thought had the best offensive line in football last year. And y'all got a big offensive line now. Now, I know you're dealing with some issues with suspensions and injuries up there. I imagine that come October, everything should be pretty settled. And I do think that that's going to really help Sean McVay lean into his strengths as a play caller and the strengths of the really remarkable skill position players that the Rams have. We've had fellow cigar enthusiast Colby Parkinson on the show, and he and I have kind of stayed in touch since he left for the Rams. And I texted him. I said, how does Rams camp compare to Seahawks camp? And I was not expecting his answer. He says it's really similar to Pete. It's just a lot of like player focused, like happy, upbeat, like get after it type stuff. And I assumed it'd be a little bit more militant, but when you can blend that attention to detail that McVay and his staff have historically had with also like, hey, we're here to get after it and have some fun. I think that's a really, really exciting thing. So as much as I pray on the downfall of the Rams every day, it does feel like it's at least 1 year off. Maybe the only team that I pray for a downfall more, and I think that you can get on board with this. This is the San Francisco 49ers, and this is a team that I feel has had the best roster in the NFL for 3 years now, certainly 2 since they brought Christian McCaffrey in. And I always say every Brock Purdy win-loss stat that you want to throw out there is a Christian McCaffrey win-loss stat. And maybe running backs don't matter as much as they used to, but Christian McCaffrey fucking matters. And it's so clear. But this is a team that is going through an identity crisis right now. They, much like the dominant Seahawks teams of the early 2010s, they had a lot of all-pro talent on cheap or rookie contracts. Then we saw, the those listening to the show, those of you watching, you remember what 2015 was like after a heartbreaking Super Bowl loss, and now everyone needs to get paid. And you've had a bunch of long postseason runs in a row. You've had a lot of short off seasons. You're coming off of just sour finishes. I mean, 2 brutal Super Bowl losses, 2 brutal NFC Championship losses, right? And that's all in 4 consecutive years, and now everyone needs to get paid. So we've got a team with, if everybody's there, insane talent. But I want to talk to you about this crisis, and I don't use that word lightly, that I think this team is facing, both from a monetary and an identity standpoint. You have Trent Williams, who I think is the baddest dude in the NFL and who would have got my MVP vote last year if I had one. He is holding out and he's looking to reset the market, even though he's well into his 30s. You've got the Brandon Ayuk drama, which has, I mean, look, wide receivers, oftentimes, you know, if they're at the top of the game, they bring some drama. And holdouts bring some drama, but this one feels like it's at another level. You've got Hufanga, their amazing young safety. He's coming up for a deal. You got Dre Greenlaw coming up for a deal. Brock Purdy's about to make $50 million more per year than he's making right now. It feels like it's almost all or nothing this year for the 49ers.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're trying to see how long you can, when your little light is on in your car.
The check engine light is definitely on for the 49ers.
Or like even the gas light. You're like watching the mile clock tick down like one by one. You're on the if you're an LA person, you know, like you're on the 405 and you think you can make it past 2 more exits so that you hit the bulk of rush hour, and you know that there's a chevron like just right on the other side. But you might, it's depending on the start stop and some of the intangibles that come up along the way, like you might not make it. And I think that's sort of the line that they're walking right now. Their check engine light, their gas light, that it is on, it is yelling at them. But also like you have, you know, someone who's really good at driving at the wheel. And I think that this is, I have such an, I would call it, and I think Kyle Shanahan would appreciate this, I have like such an ominous respect for the 49ers because of they just, when they are right, when they are functioning, when they're healthy, they are unstoppable. They are absolutely dominant. They will crush the life out of you, and they want you to know it, and they want you to feel every breath leaving your body. Like that's just how they operate. And so when you see little cracks start to form, and this Trent Williams thing, you know, the Brandon Ayuk thing I think is a big deal, obviously, but you could see the 49ers start to, it's not 1 for 1, but you could see them start to draft out from under some of the aging veterans on their roster. Now, those guys need time to grow, and they probably need to get on the field. So if they're thinking like Ricky Pearsall, for example, is a capable player, and they're, I know he's got the shoulder issue that they've been worried about, and I've heard really mixed reviews on him from beat writers like throughout camp in general. But if you think that that's going to be eventually someone who takes over in a role in your offense, you've got to get him on the field. So you kind of can grit your teeth and say, okay, if this doesn't work out with Brandon Ayuk, which it kind of goes in waves. Like one day it's going to be fine, they're going to keep him. And then the next day it's like, oh, he's got one more thing in this contract that needs to happen. And oh, could Washington come back and make a push? And still might happen. But this, with Trent Williams, you cannot live with yourself for letting that guy walk in a season that might be your last best shot with the current core of players before you have to balance everything around what the quarterback is making. And I almost wonder if they ultimately decide on something with Trent Williams where they do something that is, front loaded this year, and something that's very manageable to keep pushing down the road financially on the back half. You almost have to.
I know, but it's going to be tough for them to do that because they did that with Bosa last year.
Exactly.
Like they already started kicking money, and they got Kittle to rework a contract to make it happen. You can only go to these guys so many times and say, hey, can you move your money around for this other guy? And, I mean, golly, losing Dre Greenlaw in the Super Bowl, a brutal injury. There's so many parallels to the 2014 Seahawks and how they, lost Cliff Averill in that game, and the effect that it had in the middle of a game that they were kind of dominating against the Patriots. And then, you look at the subtractions that they have up front. Some of it is a lot of talent on defense. Some of it's a lot of name value. But Eric Armstead is gone. Javon Kinlaw is gone. Chase Young is gone. Randy Gregory is gone. We don't know when we're going to see Dre Greenlaw back. And yes, they still have Fred Warner, and they've got some capable cornerbacks. And, Bosa is still there. But we are also seeing Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams miss training camp, and Nick Bosa missed training camp last year and was not Nick Bosa. He was a defensive player of the year, quality defensive end, and he was not that last year after missing training camp. And I don't think those two things are unrelated. And so, I think this is still the best team in the division. I think they might still be the best team in the NFL, but the cracks are beginning to show.
Yeah, I think I worry of any of those names that you just mentioned, including Nick Bosa. I worry the least, and Nick Bosa being a previous situation, but just for the sake of the argument, I worry the least about Trent Williams.
Same.
I just think he's
Walter Jones never made a training camp.
He's as plug and play as it could possibly get. But I do, you do worry. You've got to get throws in with your receiver. Yes, they established good rapport, obviously great rapport last year, but you've got to get throws in. You've got to get any new wrinkles, adjustments. Defenders are going to cover you differently. You've got to get all of that stuff in. So, but if you're a receiver, particularly with this quarterback, so I do think that I worry the least about Trent Williams. I worry the most about the Trent Williams situation for the 49ers in terms of, can they get this done? I worry the least about it if it's like, okay, the eve of their opener and Trent Williams is like, okay, I'm coming to work tomorrow.
Totally.
Like, I'm not worried about that at all. I will say getting Hufanga off PUP, that's big for their defense. Although, like you said, he is coming up eventually. And then I know I go back and forth about how much do you play starters in the preseason versus not. Leonard Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos, like, that's tough to see that if you're the 49ers, because Leonard Floyd was supposed to be kind of your veteran acquisition. I will say I covered Leonard Floyd, and there was a day in training camp where the Rams thought they lost him to a season-ending knee injury, and he played through it for the entire season and had a really great year and then got paid.
Incredible when they do that.
If anyone's going to play through something, I believe Leonard Floyd is going to be that person. But still, their defensive line looks very different to me than it did a year ago, 2 years ago. I have big questions. Mike, your guy, Brandon Staley, is in town over there. He's going to do a lot of bespoke game plans, I think, for that defense. But at the same time, you can't mask questions about a front that, has these types of questions. You can't really scheme around that at a certain point.
Question for you, Jourdan. How good is Brock Purdy?
Ooh, good question. I think I'm an optimist. I think I'm a little bit more lenient on Brock Purdy because I don't like to punish players for the system around them. I think that it's hand in hand. A quarterback should not be weighed down by his system, and vice versa. A quarterback should not be the one weighing down the system. So I think if you have the correct pace, not only of ability and scheme and playmakers, it's what works for that ecosystem. I will say there's a reason Kyle Shanahan wanted Matthew Stafford. It's because you can build an offense around a quarterback who can do literally anything at the line of scrimmage and mess with defenses in ways that those defenders maybe never thought was possible, and change things and make really complicated decisions. And I think that last year we saw Brock Purdy take more risks, throwing outside the numbers a little bit more, having a number one receiver, a bona fide dude. That really helps. But I do think that you saw him just get a little bit more daring. Now, we on NFL Day, I do NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal, and we did this really fun show called Quarterback Island. And for now, we do have Brock Purdy on Quarterback Island because of the body of work from last year. And some of the notable statistics, which also, I will agree, go hand in hand with the offense and the playmakers around him and the play caller around him. At the same time, that island will be up for a lot of debate, particularly if he doesn't have a left tackle, he doesn't have a number one receiver, and like this offense starts to show some cracks, the way we keep alluding to.
Yeah, I'm with you, and those who have listened to this show for a while know that I do not penalize good players for playing with other good players or for being in a good system. You do not achieve greatness at this level without having a ton of talent all over the place. By the same token, this team almost won a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo, and Jimmy Garoppolo has looked terrible outside of San Francisco. So, I mean, it's
multiple things are true. That's like we have to be able to do that. Yeah.
Since they started tracking separation by wide receivers, there has never been a season in history by any team where the average separation for wide receivers was as great as the 49ers had last year. Brock Purdy had the easiest windows in modern NFL history to throw to, but he still made those throws. We've seen other quarterbacks in that system not do it. We've seen Nick Mullins and Trey Lance and others not be able to do what Brock Purdy has done. I think that he is a good quarterback. I think the ultimate test is going to be when he's making $50+ million a year, and that is going to have consequences down the roster from there. Can he still elevate? It was a question that Russell Wilson had to face when he signed a huge contract the first time and the second time. And it does put a lot of stress on the team. But those are next year problems. I think this year, this is still a team that I project to win this division. I think that there is just too much talent overall. And you can lose a Brandon Ayuk and still have Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey, right? Like these guys can weather injuries to their best players in ways that other teams can't. The Trent Williams one, though, I agree. He's the lodestone, because we saw this team play 3 games without Trent Williams last year, and they went from scoring over 30 points a game to scoring 17 in each of those games and lose. And it's just so easy to forget how small the gap between NFL teams really is. Even the ones we think are really good versus the ones we think are really bad. We see dozens of upsets every year because everyone in the NFL is good at football. And the 49ers margin has been fairly big for a couple of years. It feels smaller this year.
Yeah, it's one of those teams, by the way, you know those separation stats. I'm petitioning that we call it a new name. I've submitted this to Next Gen and NFL Jesus and True Media and PFF and anyone who will accept it. Basically, we're calling them WOW stats, WAO, wide ass open. That's what we're calling them.
That's what we're calling it now.
Okay, sounds good.
That's what we're calling it now.
We've got a winner.
Yes.
Someone took the bite. All
yeah.
right.
Oh yeah. We're on. We're on with WOW.
Wow stats. Yeah. So, I think, you know what's so funny when I think about this team, and again, I have a really healthy, if not ominous, respect for this team and everything they've done. But I think to myself, we say, like with everything, caveat, an injury away, 1 or 2 injuries from a totally altering season, all of that, right? Every team is capable of greatness or darkness within that framing, right?
Yes.
But this is a team where I fully believe that they're a playoff team. I fully believe they're a playoff or Super Bowl contender, like they have been for many, many years. At the same token, I could fully grasp, in my granted limited mental capabilities, but I could fully grasp the concept that they are also potentially not a playoff team, potentially not a Super Bowl contender if 1 or 2 things fall a certain way for them. And yes, there's so many teams like that, but this one in particular, because of these unresolved situations, because of some of the injuries at key elemental positions that they have just worries and doubts about that have been strengths for them over time, because of the aging of certain players. And I think you could put the Rams in this category as well. I could see it happening for them. I could also see it completely not happening for them and then having to reset the process earlier than maybe they expected.
Yeah, and Shanahan is an interesting one too, because I don't think at this point anyone is debating that he's one of the more brilliant X's and O's coaches. His ability to make such a complicated game essentially binary for each of his players is a true gift, and you can either do that or not. But if you can do it, you have a home in the Shanahan system. He doesn't strike me as a particularly inspiring coach, and if the vibes switch and they get bad, is he the type of guy that can get everybody juiced back up again? I think this year will be a big test for that. I want to move on to the Seahawks, and this is a team that has undergone the most change of every team in the NFC West this year. They've undergone more change than almost any team in the NFL, going from an iconic head coach, the oldest head coach in the NFL who acted like the youngest, to now the youngest head coach in the NFL who acts far older than his age in Mike Macdonald. And he didn't keep hardly anyone from the staff. It's brand new. And there was a lot of roster turnover. This is a team that has gotten a whole lot younger. And despite being deeply, deeply flawed each of the last 2 years, they managed a winning record. And I'm curious what your perspective, I'm going to make this a two-part question. I want to know what your perspective of the Seahawks team as it stands right now is going into the season, but also because you are so connected and so highly thought of throughout the NFL, you've got all these relationships. Second part is I want to know what the national vibe about the Seahawks is, because it kind of feels like they're an afterthought.
That's funny that you do say that, though, because in coaching circles, they very much are not an afterthought.
Okay.
Like, everybody's kind of wondering / worried about what they're going to do. You see it with all these teams trying to schedule joint practices with teams that run some iteration of the Mike Macdonald system and trying to figure out either hire out from under the Ravens at that point, or sort of trying to schedule like joint practices with the Chargers in the Rams case, or trying to figure out what different players who were on that team have to say about that defense, or just there's chatter about it, there's buzz about it. You hear coaching agents really talking about this being having the potential of one of the next really cool quote unquote trees. Now, gotta go play football, gotta prove it, all of those things. But that's what the buzz is right now in some of those circles. And it is super interesting to me because it's going to take, I think for this defense, it's almost the same as Sean McVay's offense in a lot of ways, with the quote unquote, the illusion of complexity. They do a lot of things out of what looks like a lot of different looks, but are actually in the same bucket or same family of calls and systems and concepts. And so they make you look like they're doing a million different things, and you have to diagnose what all of those different things are, and they make you think that they're running 100 different types of plays. They're running 5. And it's really interesting because that can, you almost have to reverse galaxy brain that with players, because they also are going to think that way when they're watching it. Okay, so now you have to really simplify and condense. One of the things that I keep hearing about Mike Macdonald is how organized he is as a teacher, and how his like teaching progression is, it just makes sense. It just really helps build layer upon layer upon layer to where all of a sudden you just have a book in your hands and you're kind of like, oh, how did all these pages get here? And I know what they all say. And so I think that that's something that takes time. I think, 2025 is when you're going to really see the full iteration of what this defense conceptually is, or even if they play deep into 2024, you're going to see parts of that start to pop a little bit. But what's happening behind closed doors, that teaching progression and that language, that's what people are buzzing about. That's what people want a piece of. That's what coaches around the league are trying to get ahead of before it has a chance to really lift itself off the ground. Everyone saw what happened to Sean McVay when they didn't get a chance to stop that Fangio system before it could fully rear its head in the biggest possible ways, right? And now everybody's sort of like, okay, well, we have to make sure that we smother this little flame of hope coming out of the Pacific Northwest before it actually has a chance to develop into something. And I think that's interesting. That's you're establishing a culture, you're building a system, you're inserting a philosophy in a place that had so much success and also had really one of the longest tenured head coaches, who had such a big personality. But like, you're doing all those things and you're also being hunted by the rest of the league. And I think that is super interesting. You really hear that mostly about offensive coaches, not necessarily defensive coaches.
Yeah.
And so I think that is something very much on my radar, very much on a lot of people in the league's radar when they're watching what comes out of Seattle's defense specifically this year.
Yeah, it's encouraging as someone who follows and covers this team, because the defense has been so frustrating. You talked about the organization that Mike Macdonald has, and the thing that I keep coming back to is everyone who's played for him or coached with him talks about his attention to detail, and it becomes a little bit of a cliche in the NFL because, yeah, of course, all these guys are detail oriented, but the Seahawks have been a sloppy football team for a number of years now. They've been poor at tackling. They've been poor at blocking. They've been poor at the basics of the game. They have easily exploitable holes in their defense that good coaches are not afraid to just hammer over and over and over again. I mean, Sean McVay kind of created the blueprint for beating the Pete Carroll cover 3 defense with all of these sail routes over and over again. I mean, I swear McVay doesn't touch 2/3 of his playbook against Seattle, and he doesn't have to. It keeps working. Now, there was a lot of defensive talent, a lot of top end talent in Baltimore also, which is going to help make a scheme look good. But they were on defense what the 49ers offense was in terms of the ability to dominate most games and to take the other team's best option away. Now, the Rams were kind of the one team that was able to crack the code last year and damn near won that game. It wasn't for that insane ending. But it's something where, and I saw an interview with Sean McVay where he was asked about Mike Macdonald. He was like not thrilled that he's in the division. It really does seem like something more than just something Seahawks fans are excited about. It seems that Mike Macdonald is figuring out the next wave of NFL defensive dominance. And if he can get these guys to do those things, it changes a lot for this team. And I agree with you about 2025. To me, 2024 is a diagnostic year.
Yeah.
And listeners of the show have heard me say it before, but there's not a lot of guys on this defense whose spot on the team in 2025 is secure. There's a lot of one-year contracts. You've got Devin Witherspoon and Leonard Williams. You assume they'll bring Uchenna Nwosu back. But really, it's a whole lot of one-year contracts. I imagine Reek Woolen will be back. He's had a terrific camp after a very spotty second year. But if this defense is even halfway good, we're talking about a team that I think is extremely talented on offense and was handcuffed by a very limited offensive coordinator last year. Now they bring in Ryan Grubb from Washington. They were the number 1 offense in college football last year, damn near won a national championship. And I think there's a lot of talent overlay between that Washington team and this current Seahawks team in terms of skill set. Of course, the biggest question is going to be the offensive line. That is always the case. But if this team is decent on defense, I don't see how they don't win more games than they lose, given what they have on offense.
Yeah, I'm sort of like prematurely geeking out over what Ryan Grubb and this offensive staff is going to show in terms of the concepts they're blending. He is obviously bringing a lot of his playbook. He didn't do a lot of, there was some college-y hash mark stuff, whatever, but he didn't really do a lot of that. He did a lot of what we see in the NFL. Every time I watched his Washington teams, I'd be like, oh, cool use of pre-snap. Wow, the formation shift.
Thank you.
Oh, I loved it. It looked like very what I'm used to watching in LA, or when I watch Kyle Shanahan's teams, or Mike McDaniel's teams, where they change play strength and formation, and they were doing it, by the way, just the same way that Mike McDaniel's doing it, to flip the play formation strength to accentuate the lefty quarterback and to create different space and voids in the back parts of the field. He's going to do 100%. All that. He's right there.
If I can interject just so that I don't forget this, because I do want to point it out. I'm so glad that you mentioned motion. Granted, it's the preseason. We are seeing just a glimpse of the playbook right now. But the Seahawks had the second most pre-snap motion in the NFL in the preseason, behind only the Miami Dolphins. And this idea that in the modern NFL, you can just line up and out execute your opponent, it doesn't work anymore. Deception is everything. And the Seahawks were the least deceptive team, these past few years on both sides of the ball. When you have this kind of talent, just put them in the maximum position to succeed. So anyway, I just wanted to say that before I forgot. Please, back to your thoughts on Grubb.
Yeah, to dork out even more, like some teams you see run a lot of motion. I'm thinking of a couple of iterations of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like, there's no point to the motion they're running. It's just a guy moving across the line of scrimmage. No, what real motion does, what the kind of motion that the McVay tree, that a lot of really talented, like Ben Johnson, that a lot of really talented offensive coordinators across the league run, always has an intent. It has a cell. It has within its own self, whether it's via the cadence or the timing to the snap, it has its own disguise. Every single one. It moves gaps. It turns players into different positions depending on which gap they stop in. It does a lot of different things. It changes play strength and play formation. Really, really good play formation, changing motion, and gap changing motion with players basically taking a gap, picking it up, putting it under their arm, and just scurrying across the line of scrimmage and then setting it down somewhere else. Like that actually changes the middle and deeper parts of the field, the space that opens up in correspondence. This is what motion with an attitude does. Yeah, and that is what I think that Ryan Grubb will bring.
Did you just MWA us?
I think we've got some good catchphrases on this episode, I've got to say. And like, so here's the thing that's really important that I think this is why I'm excited about watching this offense. As an unbiased perspective, yes, I cover the Rams, but just thinking about football and being a dork about it in general. Like, Ryan Grubb also hired Jake Peetz out of Los Angeles. And Jake Peetz was like super under the radar with the Rams staff. And what Jake Peetz did was he worked specifically with the receivers, and he was, they always talk in these systems about marrying the run and the pass, right? Well, he is the reverend, right? Like, he was in these different rooms where you're starting with the run game, you're working with the run game and the offensive lineman, you're also working with the receivers so that the receivers understand all of the different responsibilities that they have to do. It's not just motion, it's not just pre-snap misdirection, it's not just play action, it's not just those things. It's also the receivers understanding, and the Seahawks have a very talented group of receivers. It's also the receivers understanding exactly what micro details that have to happen in order to effectively make all of this sing. I will never forget the first time I learned this really up close and like understanding this for real was watching a Rams training camp practice, and Cooper Kupp was aligned in a cut split, and he stopped the play pre-snap and like waved it because they were installing, and he waved it down. He literally moved 1 inch closer to the receiver next to him in the split. And just that 1 inch movement ended up setting up a stack, like not a pick, but like a sort of a rub or a stack, 4 feet in front of the play post snap, that sprang the other receiver loose into wide ass open space. It was him moving that split, and the defender then having to adjust the way that he even tilted his hips toward that split. That's what, when people do not succeed in the McVay system, in the tree or whatever, it's rare, but when they do not succeed, it's because they don't understand how to very meticulously blend all of that pre-snap spacing and what it turns into 1 foot off the line of scrimmage, 2 feet off the line of scrimmage, 3 feet, 4 feet, 10 yards, 15 yards, all the way down the length and width of the field. What that tiny micro movement pre-snap and that tiny pre-snap alignment, like micro detail, 1 inch to the side.
It's insane.
That is actually one of the most underrated elements of what this offense, one of the secrets of this offense that it still has to this day, is still almost impossible to defend to this day because of those reasons. And that is why Mike McDonald, who has worked with Jake Peetz in the past, went out and pulled him from the Rams staff, was for this reason, because he's been in the receivers room for a few years now for the Rams. So that's where I think that this is going to be super interesting and a bit zesty, because now you've got like where the staffs, other than Shane Waldron, they had not really crossed streams a lot, right? Well, now you've got this guy who is sort of trying to prove himself in that way in Seattle, who's with Ryan Grubb, who is one of the most exciting coordinator names that's going to enter this league in 2024. And you're marrying like this system that is super interesting and uses space in very interesting and thoughtful ways with some of the offensive rules that you've seen across other parts of the NFC West for years. So if it works, it's going to be super interesting in my opinion. If it doesn't work, that's just another guy who's out the door, right? But like, this is going to be super interesting in my opinion. As a big fat football nerd, like this is going to be super fun to watch.
Yeah, I agree. You touched on a couple of things that I think are really interesting that I've thought about as well. You know, the spacing is something that gets so overlooked when we talk about offensive effectiveness, and Seattle's spacing was atrocious last year. There were so many times you had multiple receivers in the same window, which just means multiple defenders in the same window. And you never, ever saw that at Washington. And Ryan Grubb had 3 great receivers at Washington in Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. And he moved them inside and out all over the place. He wasn't afraid to kick a wide receiver 20 yards to the right of the right tackle. He wasn't afraid to put them in a diamond formation and then have them do all kinds of stuff out of there. But you still need the personnel to pull that off. And I try really hard not to be a homer. I want more than anything to have an accurate view of all football teams, but especially of the Seahawks. And I cannot help. I think that if my favorite team was, God forbid, the Jets, and I looked at the Seahawks, that I wouldn't say, this is an insanely talented skill position group. You've got 3 very good wide receivers, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jacson Smith-Njigba. You have a running back with way more juice than anyone Ryan Grubb ever had in college in Ken Walker, and then a second running back that I think is very good in Zach Charbonnet. But you have a quarterback that can hit these throws, because in order to succeed in a Ryan Grubb offense, you need to be able to make the second and third level throws. Those are the hardest throws in the NFL. They are throws that still the majority of NFL quarterbacks cannot make on a consistent basis. And the eye test and all of the downfield metrics support that Geno Smith is capable of making these tight window throws 20, 30, 40 yards away from the release point. And that was just never really unlocked with Shane Waldron. So the combination of that motion with attitude, that is a term that I love. The attention to detail with the spacing, but at the end of the day, the talent to pull this off. I think that if the offensive line is even just halfway decent this year, and with a healthy Abe Lucas, there's no reason they shouldn't be, that this can be a top 6 offense in terms of scoring. We also forget that no team runs fewer plays than the Seahawks. A lot of the knock on is DK Metcalf or Geno Smith really as good as their supporters say, is their volume stats don't add up to the other elites. Well, this is a team that doesn't run enough plays. They've struggled on third down because their offensive line has been terrible. They can't get off the field on defense because, it's like every year they've got 2 guys in the top 5 in total tackles. That's not a good thing. It means you're not getting off the field. So if the offensive line and the defense can even regress to the mean in the NFL, the skill position that the Seahawks have can put this team over the top. And that's the main reason that I'm really, really bullish on their outlook this year, is not because I'm a fan of the Seahawks. It's because we finally, I believe, have a play caller that is capable and willing to maximize the strengths of this offense.
Yeah, if they can block people, that's a big if. I think Connor Williams was a good signing, though. You know what?
I feel so much better about this team with Connor Williams on it.
Yeah, but like Jacson, we're talking about the motions and stuff. I'm telling you, man, and you know this, of course, already, but really, the cadence disguises to the motions, the timing, the snap timing to the snap, all of these different things that actually make this pre-snap window dressing sing and have a point to it. That's going to be the center working with Geno and getting that. But where was Connor Williams just playing? Miami. And, figuring out how to get that rhythm with the quarterback. I mean, it's not going to fall on any one of them in a vacuum, it's going to be both of them timing up some of this. There is different. If you go listen to Stand Behind, like what Tua and those guys do in Miami, there's a different like pause between words for every type of motion. Like that's to the point where they have gotten it down up there. And Ryan Grubb knows that. And Connor Williams knows that. And I just think that's low key one of the most important pairings of the Seahawks team, not just Ryan Grubb with the ideas and being able to try the things that are cool and the receivers that are super, super hyper talented, but like actually turning all of this thought into tangible action with that relationship between Connor Williams and Geno Smith. And I'm a believer in Geno Smith. I don't think Greg Rosenthal would let me on NFL Daily if I wasn't. But I've watched enough Geno tape over the years, particularly when he was with when he has been with the Seahawks, to be a believer in what you said, those second and third level throws, the composure that he plays with, the attitude that he plays with. It's like a chill style of FU football. Like he's going to just be like the calm killer, like how Matthew Stafford describes CJ Stroud. It's like, I just think that if you get everything, the concepts are there, the ideas are there. If you get everything flowing, everyone's in the language the right way, everybody's taking those steps to really hammer in on those details. And if they can block worth a damn, then I do think that it's going to be fun just for fans of football. Like Seahawks fans or no, like fans of football are going to enjoy seeing what that offense does. Yeah,
I think so. And we're going to put a bow on the NFC West and zoom out here for a second. But the last thing that I want to say, I don't want to come off as too Pollyanna. If this team doesn't block, it all falls apart, just like it does for every other team. I don't care how smart you are as an offensive coordinator. If you can't block, it ain't going to work.
Turns out linemen are important.
Yeah, I am not putting all my eggs in this Seahawks offensive line basket, even though I do like some of the players on it. Okay, so before we get out of here, I do want to step back and take a broader view of this division within the lens of the entire NFL. So to start, give me your predicted order of finish for the NFC West this year.
Ooh, you did this to me last time, and I second guessed it for like weeks afterward. And I was wrong, as it turns out. Also, I was wrong. Probably going to be wrong again. I do think, you know what? I actually think, you guys can call me a homer. It's fine. I think the Rams are going to finish first. Close second, 49ers, only because those situations are unsolved right now. And if they are solved, ask me again tomorrow or Thursday or whenever, and I'll probably change my answer. But because those situations remain unsolved, I'm actually going to put Seahawks third. I think we're going to see a lot of really good stuff from the Cardinals this year on offense. I just cannot buy into that defense right now. I simply cannot. Yeah, I'm with you. This probably sounds crazy to the average NFL fan, but I feel like the top three teams in this division are fairly interchangeable. Like I would not be surprised if the Rams win the division. I most certainly will not be surprised if the 49ers win the division. I'll be a little surprised if the Seahawks do, but it doesn't feel like that gap is so huge. I think for me, the 49ers, there's just too much talent. It's just, to me, they're the 2015 Seahawks again, where there is fatigue emotionally and physically and financially and some dysfunction. But at the end of the day, you still just got more dogs on the field than the people you're playing. I think they win this division for the last time for a while. I am counting on the Seahawks defense passing the Rams defense this year, and I think they're going to finish with the same record, and there will be a tiebreak somehow between the Rams, to the good days,
and the Seahawks. But I'm going to say the Seahawks win that tiebreak. But and then the Cardinals fourth, probably at like 7-10 though, and like I said, trendy going in 2025. I think there's 3 playoff teams in this division. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, if Seattle can put it together, like the philosophy and the concepts are there. If Seattle can make those real, which sometimes just doesn't happen in the first year with a regime change, but you can still see the proof of concept is there, right? And so if Seattle can make that actually a real thing, all of these ideas that we've been talking about and throwing around here, then yeah, I definitely see 3 playoff teams, 2 secure and certainly a wild card.
Yeah, I'm with you there. My other thought is I'm just looking through all the divisions because I had a thought when I was doing that show with Mina, and I was like, okay, I need to stress test this later, and I did, and I think I still believe it. I think the NFC West has the best quarterback play top to bottom of any division in football.
Ooh, I like it. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm a fan of all four, man. So
I
I'm
am
not gonna.
too.
I really am
I'm
not
a
gonna
big
argue.
Kyler guy. People know
I'm a fan of
I'm a big
Kyler.
Kyler guy.
I think he's outstanding. It's really hard to. I think, of course, I have getting to watch him every day in practice and like just being baffled by what he does and like hearing him actually organize the line of scrimmage and all that and like call the. It does not compute often. It just doesn't get old watching what Matthew Stafford can do.
Oh,
but,
he's so good.
I
He's
actually,
so good.
I really have all four of these quarterbacks. I genuinely hold them in high esteem and all for different reasons too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, Stafford's the guy you create in the lab, and then the other three win in very different ways. All right, last question for you before we get out of here. You got to bet $10,000 of your own money right now, okay? But if you get this exactly right, you win $100,000. Who are the final four in the NFL, and who beats who in the Super Bowl?
Oh man.
Real money on the line, Jordan.
Chiefs, Texans, Lions, 49ers. I'm going to pick the Texans to win the Super Bowl.
Love it.
Hanging onions, baby.
Oh, they absolutely hang their onions. There's no doubt about that.
$100,000 on the line. I'm putting it all on the Texans.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I love this. I think the Texans are absolutely in the mix. This does feel like there's more good teams in the NFL right now than any season that I can remember. I think the Lions. Okay. I think the Lions beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. And I think the Chiefs beat the Ravens to get there again. And I think the Lions beat the Eagles to get there.
Nice.
But
I could see it.
I think the Lions win the most games, and I think they take home the trophy. And man, I hope as a football fan for the city of Detroit,
I know.
a total punchline organization, that it happens. But I just think they got so much juice. I think they outplayed the 49ers in that NFC Championship game last year. They beat the Chiefs on opening day in Kansas City last year. Nothing about the Lions feels like they got worse. And the last thing that I'll say, this is maybe the most insane stat that I came across in researching the NFL this year. How many offensive coordinators in 2024 were the offensive coordinators of the same team in 2022? It's a bit of a leading question.
In 2022 or in
Yep.
2023?
No, in 2022, the offense coordinator
Oh.
for the team. That is still that 2 years later.
It's got to be 0 or close to 0, right?
That's right. It's 1, and it's Ben Johnson. And
Oh, yeah.
it's
Ben
only
Johnson.
and it's
Never-
only
never
because
leaving.
he turned down every head coaching job, right? Like that's the turnover that we forget, is that these players are having to learn a new language every single season. But the Lions are the only team with that continuity. I think that puts them over the top. Listen, Jordan, this has been incredible. Every time we have you on, it feels like it could be a 5-hour show.
I know,
and,
right?
And
I
I
had so
think
much
you
fun.
and I would both like to do that. But we may have tested the patience of our listeners as much as we can already. Listen, Jordan, we cannot thank you enough for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm still counting on you to just send me something good so that I can decompress here. Like we talked about at the top of the show.
All right, listen.
I'm still
If you get a package in the mail with no return address and it's a whole bunch of coffee beans, you know where it came from. All right.
Oh my God, I love it. It's so much fun being on with you.
I feel the same way. Listen, before we let you go, where can the listeners and viewers find more of you?
Yeah, you can find me over at The Athletic. I'm a senior writer over there. I do NFL projects as well as cover the Rams, and also rolling out the play callers all throughout the year, bonus episodes for fans of that series. I'm also on NFL Daily with Greg Rosenthal once a week, and on the Heed the Call podcast over at Underdog with Mark Sessler and Dan Hansis, Mark Dan and all the guys every Thursday during the season. So really excited about that. One of my absolute favorites, Michael Sean Dugar, is on that with me on Thursday. So we're already having a good time with that.
Love that. I love that you just name dropped a whole bunch of friends of the show here too. There's a lot of overlap there. Thank you again, Jourdan.
Thank you.
As always, you can find Mike and I on social media as well. I am on Twitter at Jacson Bevins. That's Jacson. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Mike is on Twitter at Mike Barwin, and the show itself is at Cigar Thoughts. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts and find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. As mentioned previously, this episode is brought to you by Glenfiddich Premium Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of their lineup, and we are thrilled to have them on board as a sponsor of the show. If you're watching on YouTube, you've seen me enjoying a glass of their French Oak 16, which has a bit of a vanilla profile to it that I really like. And one of the great things about a great Scotch is how well it plays with a good cigar. And once again, we do have our own special release of cigars that you can purchase at a terrific price as a listener of the show. The release of these Cigar Thoughts stogies has been successful enough for us to continue offering them for the low price of $149. That's right, only $149 for a bundle of 10. As many of you know, we partnered with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thoughts cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link on the show page to get these easy-to-smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram and we'll send you the details directly. The cigars come with a Bovita humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh whether you have a humidor or not. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article, which is going to start with week 1 coming up at fieldgoals.com. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of the show. We know you've only got so much time for podcasts in your life, and it's an honor to be a part of that for y'all. The momentum has been crazy, so please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you do give us the juice to keep making this happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.